So it's October 2024, and CNN just released an article about Deep and their Sentinel project. So here's the real quick little synopsis of that article if you didn't want to read it, and you can listen to people talk about it.
Welcome to Colonize the Ocean podcast, where we discuss oceanic colonization, exploration, and education with your hosts Adam Jewell and Brendan Traxler.
Okay, so imagine this, right? You're just chilling in an underwater habitat, sipping your toffee, but instead of looking out at the neighbors, you've got a view of the ocean floor.
Sounds kind of wild, doesn't it? Like something straight out of science fiction.
All right, but what if I told you it might be closer to reality than we think?
Oh, this is going to do good. I can tell.
Today's deep dive, we're going deep, no pun intended, into the world of Deep.
Deep.
Yeah, they're this company that's totally fixated on making underwater living a thing, like an actual thing.
Ambitious, to say the least.
And we're basing this whole deep dive on this super interesting CNN article. They really get into the nitty-gritty of Deep, their tech, the whole shebang. We're trying to figure out, can they actually pull this off? Because let's face it, underwater habitats, they've been tried before.
And let's be honest, it hasn't always gone so well. There's a reason this whole underwater living thing hasn't really, happened yet.
Exactly. So that's what makes Deep so intriguing. They seem serious about this, like really serious. And the CNN article starts off with this really interesting tidbit. It all kind of revolves around this dive center in a flooded quarry.
A quarry.
Yeah, you heard that right. And it's now become like Deep's central hub. Seems kind of random, right?
It might seem random, but it actually makes total sense when you understand Deep's whole vision. They're not messing around with small-scale stuff. They're thinking big picture, permanent, sustainable. Their goal is to create a real, lasting presence in the ocean. And that's where Sentinel comes in.
Sentinel, that's their system, right?
Bingo. Sentinel's the whole shebang of permanent. And here's the kicker. Scalable underwater habitat.
Okay, Sentinel, it does have a kind of a cool sci-fi ring to it. So we're talking like people living underwater long-term.
Long-term, like months at a time. Potentially even longer.
Wow. So imagine like the International Space Station, but underwater.
Exactly. That's a great comparison. Deep's talking about this whole network of interconnected modules. Start small, but the idea is it could grow into this massive underwater complex.
Wow. Okay, so they've got this like huge, bold vision. We've established that. But how do they actually plan to make it work? What's the tech behind all of this?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. And this is what impressed me when I was reading that CNN piece. They're not just all talk. They're actually building this stuff. In fact, they've already started on a smaller habitat, kind of like a stepping stone to the full-blown Sentinel. They're calling it Vanguard.
Vanguard. Okay. So like a prototype.
Exactly. And get this, the goal is to have Vanguard deployed in their UK quarry by 2025.
Wait, 2025? Like next year?
You got it. Sentinel's slated to follow soon after. They're talking 2027.
This is incredible. This isn't some far-off pie-in-the-sky idea. They're actually building this thing. But I gotta ask, what kind of tech goes into making a home at the bottom of the ocean?
They're using some really cutting-edge stuff, like they're constructing the modules with 3D printing, which is pretty wild in itself. But the real star of the show, the thing that's going to make or break it, is the material. Inconel. Ever heard of it?
Can't say that I have.
Yeah, most people haven't. It's this superalloy, crazy strong, often used in aerospace stuff, rockets and such. The cool thing about Inconel is that it can withstand insane amounts of pressure, and it laughs in the face of corrosion. So basically, it's perfect for deep-sea construction.
Okay, so we've got these super strong modules, right? But how do you actually get in and out of the thing? It's not like you can just open a door and, swim out for a breath of fresh air when you're hundreds of meters below the surface.
Yeah, it's a bit more complicated than that. Access will depend on how deep they are. Sometimes it'll be through a submersible that docks directly to the habitat. Other times they'll use what's called a moon pool.
A moon pool? What's that?
So picture a chamber that can be sealed off from both the ocean and the habitat. It lets divers enter and exit safely without having to, decompress every time they want to grab a sandwich.
Ah, okay. Sounds kind of like an airlock on a spaceship.
Exactly. like a transition zone between two totally different environments.
Okay, so they figured out how to build these things, how to get in and out. But what about staying connected to the outside world? Are we talking dial-up speeds from the bottom of the ocean?
Oh, please. This is the 21st century. We're not living in the dark ages down there.
So what? They've got fiber optic cables running all the way down to the ocean floor?
Even better. Deep's plan is to equip their surface buoy with, get this, Starlink internet.
Wait. Seriously, they'll have better internet than I do in my apartment.
Right. It's pretty amazing. But it makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah, gotta keep up with those Netflix shows even when you're 200 meters under.
Exactly. But seriously, this constant connection opens up some incredible possibilities. Imagine researchers being able to analyze data in real time. They could even remotely pilot underwater drones from inside the habitat.
Wow, that's a game changer. No more having to surface every 5 minutes to send an email.
Precisely. It eliminates so many of the limitations of traditional ocean exploration.
Speaking of limitations, one thing that keeps popping into my head is this whole project, it's massive. It makes you wonder, why hasn't anyone done this before? What's the catch?
Well, for starters, it costs a boatload of money. I mean, we're talking about developing and deploying some seriously complex technology. And right now, Deep is still in its early stages, so they're relying heavily on securing funding, partnerships, grants, the whole 9 yards.
Makes sense. Not exactly an easy sell, right? Hey, want to invest in my underwater city?
Right. But even if the money's there, you got to think about the safety concerns. I mean, we're talking about sticking people in an environment that's about as forgiving as, well, outer space.
Yeah, one tiny malfunction and...
Exactly. Ensuring the long-term safety and reliability of these habitats is absolutely critical. Any little thing, a power outage, a leak, it could be catastrophic at those depths.
No room for error. But let's say, just for argument's sake, that they figure it out, they get the funding, they make it safe. What's the big picture here? Why go through all this trouble to put people on the ocean floor?
Because the potential payoff is huge. Imagine marine biologists being able to live in the environments they study. Not just quick little visits in a submersible, but really immersing themselves in these ecosystems for extended periods.
It'd be like having a permanent research station in the rainforest. But instead, it's on the ocean floor.
Exactly. We could see breakthroughs in our understanding of marine life, ocean currents, maybe even help us tackle climate change. And the CNN article mentioned some other interesting applications too.
Yeah, like what?
Well, for one, think about infrastructure maintenance. Instead of sending divers down for short periods, you could have crews living and working underwater full-time, inspecting pipelines, repairing communication cables.
It'd be a game changer for how we maintain critical infrastructure.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the whole tourism aspect.
Right. Imagine that, spending your vacation in an underwater hotel.
I can see the appeal, waking up every morning to a school of fish swimming by your window. It would be a unique experience, that's for sure.
To say the least. But it does make you think, with all these potential benefits, why haven't we figured out this whole underwater living thing yet? It's not like this is a new idea, right?
You're right. Deep isn't the first to dream of living beneath the waves. In fact, there's a long and fascinating history of underwater habitats.
So before the break, we were talking about, those early attempts at underwater living, like those pictures you always see, the really cool ones.
Oh, you mean like the conch shell habitats?
Yeah, those ones, those are so cool. But those weren't meant to be permanent, were they?
No, not really. Cousteau, he was really the first one to really try this whole thing out. But his vision was always about, like, extended stays, not like actually living underwater forever,
Yeah, makes sense. But there were other projects too, right? Like, wasn't there Hydrolab and Aquarius? I feel like I remember hearing about those.
Absolutely. Those were big ones. Hydrolab, that was down in the Bahamas for ages. And Aquarius, that one was even cooler. They had it going for years off the coast of Florida.
Wow, years. So what happened? Why'd they shut them down if they were so successful?
Funding. It always comes back to funding, doesn't it? Both of those projects, they were government-run. And when budgets get tight, well, those kinds of projects, the big ambitious ones, they're usually the first to go.
That's a bummer. It's like we take a few steps forward and then something always seems to hold us back. So is Deep's fate tied to the same kind of uncertainty?
Well, here's the interesting thing, right? Deep's coming along at a time when there's this really interesting surge in, like, private investment in ocean exploration.
Really? So it's like kind of a new space race.
It's kind of like that, yeah. You've got these initiatives like Ocean X, funded by Ray Dalio, and then there's Victor Vescovo, who went down to the Mariana Trench. private individuals are really starting to drive this new era of ocean exploration.
So maybe DIP's kind of riding this new wave, tapping into that same sense of adventure, the same kind of excitement that surrounded the early days of, like, space travel.
Exactly. And just like those early space programs, Deep gets it. They understand that it's not just about the tech, right? It's about getting people excited, about training the next generation of, like, aquanauts.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of which, all those early habitats, they look, well, pretty basic.
Spartan is a good word for it.
Yeah, exactly. Functional, but not exactly the Ritz-Carlton.
And that's another thing Deep is trying to change. They understand that if you're asking people to live and work underwater for months on end, well, comfort matters a lot. And their designs for Sentinel, they reflect that. We're not talking about just surviving down there. We're talking about thriving. Soundproof bunks, big communal areas for hanging out, even huge windows so you can enjoy the view. Well, as much of a view as you can get at 200 meters down.
Okay, now that sounds pretty amazing. So where does that leave us? What's the final word on Deep? Are they going to pull it off?
Honestly, it's still early days. They've got a long road ahead of them. But there's this real sense of momentum, this feeling that this time it could be different.
It's an incredible vision, that's for sure. And it really makes you wonder, what could we accomplish if we could unlock the secrets of the deep? Could we find new life, new resources, maybe even solutions to some of the biggest problems facing our planet?
Now, those are questions worth exploring.
They are, and that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. So, to everyone listening, we want to hear your thoughts. Hit us up on social media. Let us know what you think about Deep and the future of underwater living. Until next time, keep exploring.